you've already built 2 open source JavaScript framework companies. How many people on earth have done that?
Probably less than 5.
Why?
Open source is an incredibly valuable thing for the world to do, but there are also so few people that know how to do it really well.
For anyone who doesn't know what Mastra is and who it's for, fill everyone in.
So Mastra is an open source TypeScript agent framework. People build customer-facing, user-facing agents within their SaaS, right? People build internal agents. People build like developer platform agents like AI SREs with Mastra in TypeScript.
How old were you when you started at Gatsby?
A few years out of school, so I think I was 28 or 29 when we founded the company. You know, the things that you sort of learn the second time, you're just a little bit more confident in your own judgment and your own capabilities. There are a lot of things that I wish we had known the first time, but we couldn't have known the first time because we were doing it the first time.
Is there anything you shipped recently that you're especially excited about?
So recently shipped this agent controller, which lets you build your own kind of like Claude code.
You're the author of Principles of Building AI Agents. It's become one of the go-to texts for people building this space.
Which is crazy, right?
It's insane. Were you expecting this? Sam, welcome to the Agents at Work podcast.
Thanks for having me here.
Super exciting. So where are we right now?
We're at Y Combinator.
And what does this space mean to you?
So we went through YC in winter of 2025, and so much happened that was like really important to Mastra and our journey. So like this is one of the most meaningful parts of San Francisco for me.
It really is, and this is my first time here as well, so this is very exciting. Okay, and so for anyone who doesn't know what Mastra is and who it's for, fill everyone in.
So Mastra is an open source TypeScript agent framework. People build customer-facing, user-facing agents within their SaaS, right? People build internal agents. People build like developer platform agents like AI SREs with Mastra in TypeScript.
And so you've already built 2 open source JavaScript framework companies. How many people on earth have done that?
Probably less than 5.
Why?
It's this open source is incredibly like a valuable thing for the world to do, but there are also so few people that know how to do it really well, and yeah.
And you're one of them.
Apparently so.
Very exciting. So are you ready? We're gonna go inside.
Let's do it.
And do the full interview.
Okay. So actually, like when we were in the batch, we were standing here handing out like 20 boxes basically of Pete Kazanji's founding sales books. It was one of the things that inspired us to write our own book.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm really excited to get into your own book. Sam, you have a really big audience on LinkedIn. You have 50,000, like somewhere
It's
around
kind of
there.
crazy.
15K on X. Tell me more about that, your strategy and content.
I mean, I don't know if it's a strategy but like we basically like I mean, I have this belief that like content wants to be frequent in the same way that like information wants to be free. And so if you can post like helpful things that are like good quality at like a good cadence, you know, like no. You know, there's a limited audience for like your personal jokes and whatever, but if you're really thoughtfully posting things that and like making something that's like hard easy, and you just do that over time, you know, that's like a there's other nuances and bits, but like that are sort of like the specific tricks of like how to post things that do really well on Twitter, or how to post things that do really well on LinkedIn that are very platform specific. But I think the general thing is just like be generous with your expertise and knowledge and be helpful to other people, and like that, you know, good things will follow.
And so you mentioned about like shipping, like the tiers, like shipping every day. Tell me more about
So
that.
right now the team has gotten to the place where they're shipping a tier 1 feature every day, or you know, maybe it's like every other day sometimes, but and so we're doing these releases on X every day, and so it's actually interesting because there was actually, you know, I'm actually like the bottleneck of the org has moved to like, how do we release all the cool stuff that we're building, which is like a really great place honestly to be in. And like, hey, we've just done all this really cool work and now we need to shout about it. You know, I think that like, you know, we're now sort of like moving to a world where like we want, you know, now we've figured out how to like release in public and share in public what we're building like every day, and you know, we're now trying to figure out, hey, how do we share like a user story, and this is a specific kind of thing that people are building with Mastra every day.
Okay, so you have user stories, you have like case studies, you have like smaller like tweets, like bigger ones? What kind of other like formats are you experimenting with?
I mean, it was actually interesting, like sort of like around the time of the Netlify acquisition, I wrote sort of like a long article about this. And I think there's different groups of, you sort of have like developer community type stuff, whether it's like a GitHub issue or Discord. You have like documentation and sort of like tutorials and how-tos. You, on the other hand, have like this, marketing kind of case studies, which is like, I got a 3x improvement from this, or it saved me like 70% or whatever. In the middle, you have this like solutions engineer type of content, which is like, here's a architecture deep dive of like how we built this, and how you might build a thing, or, a very sort of like technical deep, it's like a reference architecture. It's a technical deep dive. It's something that's like really specific to a particular use case or a particular industry. It's like very grounded. It almost, I think it like harkens back to my journalistic background, where it just feels very, the reader reads it and they feel like, well, this was written for someone like me because it was written by someone that really understands like their particular situation.
Wow, that's incredible. And how much did you raise?
So we raised, in our seed round, we raised a $13 million seed round coming out of YC. And then we raised then recently, earlier this year, we raised a $22 million Series A.
Congrats, that's incredible.
Thank you.
Okay, Sam, so tell me some of your other exciting moments here in YC.
So the room that we're in now is the room that that all the YC founders come to after the batch is done. And we have about an hour where everyone is saying, like, thanking other companies, other founders for like, things that they did during the batch. And during that, like 3 founders like called out like something like I had done, or like we had done as Mastra to like help them. And it was just like the most, flattering. And like, it was like, we just felt like we had done something like not just for ourselves and their, users, but like for the rest of the batch.
Were you also looking at other accelerators? What made you choose YC in particular?
I mean, there's only one YC, right? So,
Yeah.
So I was, I've worked for 3 different YC founders.
Wow.
And so my first company, Gatsby, we'd sort of applied to YC back in 2017. And honestly, we were just not very good at explaining what we were doing back then. But we ended up raising money elsewhere. Didn't get into YC, raised money elsewhere, but as this was taking off, we wanted to be in YC because YC was ground zero of building agents. And we just felt like if we came to YC, we would learn the most and we would build the best product. We felt like the community and the network were just second to none. And sentimentally, like having worked for 3 YC founders, having loved all that experience, I kind of really wanted to be a YC founder, right?
That's awesome. What are the really cool people you met while you were here?
I mean, there's so many, right? So there's like a few different types of things. Like one, you just kind of have, you have evening kind of events every week, and then the Brian Chesky's of the world, or the Tony Zhu's of the world come and kind of share their stories and their experience. But on a one-to-one level, you get to know like a lot of your other batchmates, people who are building incredible things, sometimes in like very different domains than you are, and sometimes in very similar domains. And so some of the companies that we, work very closely with, like Assistant UI, for example, like we met in the YC batch. And then you get to know like the partners, and you get to know, the alumni and sort of like the community, right? So Gustav was our YC partner, and Gustav has this incredible growth mindset, and he's able to break down any problem into sort of the analytical capabilities and walk you through like a decision framework of how you would sort of like choose the right answer. Each of the partner has like something they bring to the table. Brad Flora like is like the most encouraging person and always has like the pithy, like moral but practical lesson. And so like one of our values is generosity breeds luck, which was originally like a line that he said to us as we were kind of like it was kind of in a like in one of our group office hours. So there were so many like people and that like shaped our journey.
That's so amazing. And so when we were talking for the prep call, you said you've gone from turn-based strategy to real-time strategy. So what does that mean?
So I think that like, this is my reflection having sort of second time founder, right? But it used to be that product development was like, let us think in a very analytical frame about what is the next 3 months or 6 months or 12 months of product development. And, you'd have these like, here's the next 4 quarters, and like, let us analyze all the user requests we have. And now it's just more like, life comes at you really fast. And so you're lucky if you can plan, 2-3 months in advance. But your goal really is just pump as much information into your network, into your system as possible, right? And then like act as quickly as possible. So it's really like, if you're a StarCraft player, it's really about like actions per minute that you're doing. And it's less about like, hey, I have this like perfect strategy for like winning, and like after we do these like 7 steps in a row.
Wow. What does it change to how you run a company day to day?
Again, it's sort of like about acting quickly, as opposed to doing the perfect thing. So I think like George Patton had this like quote, right? Like a good plan violently executed like tomorrow is better than the perfect plan executed next week. I think that's always been true, but I think it's even more true in a world where like development sort of speed is up by like 3 or 4x, right?
Your take is that the people with an edge right now are the ones who've done the specific thing before, so the unks. What does experience beat fresh eyes in a moment everyone calls unprecedented?
So I think like, again, I think it's about actions per minute. So there's like 2 ways of having sort of like actions per minute. One is like, and it really just is like being in contact with the ground truth. If you've been doing something for 10 years, like we've been doing open source JavaScript, TypeScript frameworks, we know our domain really, really well. Better than maybe almost anybody in the world, hopefully better than everyone in the world. And so we just have a really clear mental model of like how to succeed. And that means that like we can react to events really well. But also, if you're sort of, you've just dived, deeper into this frontier of like AI development or ML research more than anybody else, because you just spent the last 4 years obsessing over it while you were in college. Like that's also like a domain type of expertise, and you may have an advantage that like people that are in their mid-30s like me have never seen that like particular niche specialty. You may be the world expert on that thing. But ultimately, like it's about moving quickly and maximizing your actions per minute.
Yeah. Are you really happy that you kind of started at the time that you started? How old were you when you started Gatsby?
So let's see. When we started Gatsby, I was a few years out of school. So I think I was 28 or 29 when we founded the company. A bit before when we started working on the open source project. The things that you sort of learn the second time, you're just a little bit more confident in your own judgment and your own capabilities. And it's the judgment that kind of comes from experience. There are a lot of things that I wish we had known the first time, but we couldn't have known the first time because we were doing it the first time.
Yeah. What are one of the things that you wish you have known?
I think there's a lot of, so for example, like sort of like how to optimize, spending time optimizing onboarding flows. What are the nuances of making a really great API name, for example? How do you have sort of progressive disclosure of complexity of your framework where like it's easy to get started, but also that doesn't block you from like the more complex path? Developer experience is this like weird niche that like, unless you've like worked for a long time in dev tools, it takes a while to kind of gain an intuition for it. How do you like talk about what you're building in a way that is like sort of accessible for beginners, but not kind of a turnoff for experienced folks, and like in as much technical detail as possible where people really understand, here's what I do. How do you build a community? How do you sort of get people answers to their questions and deal with some of the weird nuances of a community that lives on GitHub or Discord, and the sort of this like, there's just like a lot of nuances that are like very specific to the domain that we've spent the last 10 years in.
Yeah. And I remember listening to one of your podcasts, you mentioned how it's really important to ask for feedback and, don't just accept someone who says, yeah, it's great. Like you got to like dig deeper and like get people to really tell you kind of.
So I'll tell you a story. So we started working on Mastra on October 1st of 2024. Okay. 3 weeks later, we showed up at NextConf, and like Shane, Abhi, and I, we'd built a little bit, and we went around to get feedback. We talked to about like 11 or 12 people, and we got a lot of, oh, that's interesting, And it turned out that like what we had done is we had built our workflow engine in a config first way rather than a code first way. And so when you showed the API to the developers, which is our target market, right, or target user, they were like, well, that could be cool for someone that isn't me, and they're sort of mediocre level of like enthusiasm. And so, about like we were gonna try to talk to 20 or 25 people, but by like 1:30 or 2 o'clock, we'd had enough. We'd gotten the feedback we needed. We like we went a couple miles away to a bar, and we're like, okay, what did we fuck up, right? Like, and then like we kind of figured it out within like an hour or two. Like we like debated various things, and we're like, okay, we think this is what we fucked up. And then we spent the next 3 weeks like fixing the APIs. Taking the good things that we'd done and sort of like then we relaunched 3 weeks later, and then like that had like really positive feedback, right? But we knew when someone said, "Oh, that's interesting," that like they were actually like not actually that interested.
Ooh, okay. That's really wow. And so you also tell founders it's okay to quit their idea and go join something that's scaling.
Yeah, so I think like there's always a balance. Like there are people that work on like the idea for like 6 or 7 or 8 years, and they can work on it. You can give up on an idea too quickly, but you can also work on an idea past the time when you could reasonably be successful. And I think it's okay if you think that that's the case for you, to say like, look, I've given it everything I could. I'm it's not time for me to be a founder right now. I might be a founder again in the future.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's okay to say, like, hey, I'm going to do something else for a little bit, and we'll come back to this later.
Yeah, I agree. And so walk me through the agent stack as you see it. Where does a framework like Mastra sit, and what plugs into it?
So the way that we see this is that there's sort of a domain complete framework like Mastra that lets you do all the things that you need to do to build an AI agent or application or harness. And so, that might be an agent. So we have agent primitives, we have workflow primitives, we have harness sort of primitives. We have an agent controller primitive that lets you basically build like your own sort of like Claude Code or Claude Tag or Devin, right? And so there are these different different abstractions at different areas of the stack. And then you have like what I would call sort of like utilities. And so, for example, in the web world, this might be like email sending, right? Like if you're using Next.js, you still might want to use something like Resend, right? You might still want to use an auth provider like BetterAuth, right? And so, in the agent world, there are a few, for example, like BrowserBase or Exa. There are these different categories of tool providers. So browser use and web use is one. You have like integration, so Composio is a part of that. And then there are these other things. So agents, need email. Agents sometimes need a voice, and there are other bits and pieces along the way that are sort of these utility kind of categories that like plug into the central domain complete framework.
And is there anything you shipped recently that you're especially excited about?
I mean, there's a lot of things. So I'll sort of like I'll kind of like call out a few. I'll call it a few of them. So we recently shipped this agent controller, which lets you build your own kind of like Claude code. So that's like really valuable. If you're like, hey, I want to put OpenClaw or I want to put Claude code in a box, but gosh, it feels like it's giving it too much power and out of control. Now you can kind of build your own with Mastra, which is like really exciting. Our agent builder, which is our agent builder, which is a kind of basically a way that you can developers can configure a set of tools and a set of integrations and a set of permissions where non-technical users can actually build agents. We shipped that recently, and then we added a Composio integration for the tools as well.
Nice. And so here we have your book. You're the author of Principles of Building AI Agents. It's become one of the go-to texts for people building this space.
Which is crazy. Like,
it's insane. Were you expecting this?
So no, it was really an accident. So and it's funny that we're here at YC, right? Basically, like we started during the batch. We were actually we were handing out these founding sales books to people. So Pete Kazanji, the author, sent me a bunch of boxes of books, and we were just handing them out to our batch because we were like, hey, like everyone kind of needs to learn how to sell, and so like we'll just help our batchmates. It's a good way of getting to know our batchmates, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of a nice thing that we could do for them. Yeah. But everyone loved the books, and then after that, we were like, well, like, because I'd written a book at Gatsby, and so it was like we were having a bunch of like, whiteboarding type sessions, and after one of them, my co-founder Shane was like, what if you wrote a book? I was like, maybe I should, and then I was like, what if I wrote a book and then we brought it to demo day, And so that was this like really, and so it was almost in some ways like kind of a practical joke, right? We're like, well, nobody's ever done this before, so wouldn't it be kind of funny if we did this thing?
Oh my
So then I just kind of like locked myself in a room for a couple of weekends, and then like I write really fast. I used to do journalism in school. I can pound out 600 words pretty quickly. So then came out of those weekends with the 90-page book. We figured out how to get it printed pretty quickly. Brought it to demo day, and then people loved it at demo day. Like investors would like read copies of it, and then they'd tell our batchmates, based on this book, I have some product feedback for you. And we were like, okay, like this is. So then we started bringing it up to meetups, and again, it was just like this huge hit. And then this was in March of last year, and then soon, we brought it to startup school. We gave out 2,000 books in the course of, I don't know, like a couple hours, basically. And it was almost like I was like a human vending machine. It's like reach down, hand out book, reach down, hand out book, right? And it's just like one thing led to another, and it just kind of snowballed.
That's amazing. So I got this book when I was at a hackathon, and I was like, yeah, like I've seen it online. I started reading it. I read halfway, and then I didn't finish reading it. But then as soon as I started prepping for yours, and this was like after a few months later, like I read it again, and I like, because I was like, I've been in this space for a few months now, working here full time, I like started picking up things, and things are starting to make more sense compared to the first time I read it. So like as a non-technical, I definitely recommend you guys read this book as well, because they really just, it's just such an easy read. And this is the second edition, but you have 3 editions, right?
This is so like, we recently came out with a 3rd edition as well.
And it's because things are always changing and moving fast. So you always have to keep, is that why?
Right, it's in the age, it's funny because it's kind of ironic that in an age where development is actually moving so fast, we made an old school print book. And so, to do that, we've had to like update it like pretty frequently and keep printing out new versions and sharing it with folks.
So when's the 4th version coming out?
We'll see about the 4th one.
Okay.
A 3rd one is coming out probably in November or December. So I think we're gonna work on that first.
And so is this almost like kind of like a growth engine for you too? Like
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's like sort of like two pieces, right? There was something we learned at YC, which is something one of our partners said to us, which is generosity breeds luck. Yeah. And that became like a core value of ours. And so part of this is that like, look, like everybody is trying to figure out how to build agents right now. And so we have built an open source framework to help people build agents. And sometimes the catalyst for people like, building is that we like, print and distribute tens of thousands of copies of this book every month, and like a significant fraction of our users hear about us through the book, or like, oh, you're the guys, even if they found us another way, then they realize that like, oh, we're the people that wrote the book, and they're like, Wow.
And so you'd mentioned how you were in journalism, like you were studying journalism before. Tell me more about that. Like, what did you learn there?
So maybe there's like a literary streak in my family. My grandfather was in Mumbai, was a relatively prominent publisher there. My father is a scientist, so he publishes a lot of papers. I loved working for my student paper when I was in school. I really just loved immersing myself in a problem and getting to like go around and understand something and then be the person that kind of like narrated that to other people. Now I was originally like class of 09, which means, and like, it was kind of during the great financial crisis, and journalism was sort of like in very rapid decline. It was pretty obvious to me that it wasn't like a great, even though I loved doing it, it wasn't like a great like path, but it's something that I've always had kind of a fondness in my heart for. I love writing. And I love the thinking that you get to do while you're writing, right? And so, I just ended up being in this really unique place where I got to write a book kind of describing like this huge transformation that was happening.
That is so crazy. And I feel like now we're almost entering this new era of like journalism. I mean, new media has been going around. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think people really like authenticity, right? Yeah. There's this sense of like, we're talking about this, and you were going around San Francisco putting up those MCP versus CLI signs, which just like so much captured the zeitgeist of that moment in time. And I think like, there's this like, rather than sort of like traditional media where everything's kind of repackaged and reprocessed and like nobody's really like, you're able to like go really deep on something you know really well, and then produce it in a way that like everybody kind of like consumes it. And I think people can sense the authenticity of both the storyteller and the subject in that kind of format.
Yeah. So yeah, be authentic. And so
No,
you're
be authentic. Like this is like this is also like a big principle of YC, right? Like is like if you are authentically yourself, if your company is sort of an authentic expression of yourself, I think people very much sense that like you know it's not just a product; it's like part of who you are, right?
Yesterday, I had this conversation with someone at this event, and he was telling me that there's actually a lot of founders, they don't actually do it for the passion. They do it for like more of the money and then to get acquired, and then like so I was surprised by that actually.
I wouldn't say there's as many founders that like the way that I would think about that is that like being a founder is a much safer career track than it used to be. So like you know, like I don't think a lot of people are doctors for the money. They're doctors because that's what their parents want them to become, because their parents perceive it as the safe career track. And now that being a founder is more of a safe career track, there's an increasing tendency of like, well, I'm just going to do the, you know, the thing that's kind of like the default. You know, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? It means it's more acceptable to people, but it also means that, you know, back when tech was the weirdos and the outsiders, there was like a sort of purism that, you know, is maybe more rare these days.
Yeah, that is true. And so you write that our job may shift from choreographer to architect as models do more planning. What does that mean for people building agents today?
Yeah, so I think you should like be thinking about like I think let's talk about like the difference between context engineering and harness engineering. So, you know, when Dex wrote his piece on context engineering last summer, which just seems forever ago, right? It was about like how do you structure your prompt? How do you inject the right things into the model's context window? Whereas harness engineering is much more about how do you empower your harness to create the right subagents to get the right information that can then be injected into the context. And I think there's like a fundamental distinction between like these two types of things. And one is like, you know, carefully crafting it, and the other is like how to design the system that does that sort of like does the right thing.
Ooh, yeah. You say hand coding evals is dying in the era of Claude Code. What replaces it, and why do you think evals are more important than people realize?
I mean, I think this is like, you know, hand coding evals is dying in the same way that hand coding anything is dying, right? So I think if you're looking for sort of like a driver, that to me, that's the biggest driver. I would say that, you know, increasingly we're turning to these sort of like continual learning or sort of like synthetic evals. There's a few different names for it, where you're actually able to like look at the traces, look at the trajectories, look at the conversations. And then, you know, a human is kind of, you know, maybe selecting like, okay, let's create an eval from this, or maybe, you know, an assistant is suggesting, you know, hey, here are 5 conversations you may want to create evals for, or like maybe a human is like labeling, hey, like this is inaccurate, and then you create an eval based on that. But, you know, it used to be much more of a sort of like, hey, like, you know, you'd have a domain expert entering in question answer pairs into a Notion spreadsheet, let's say, and now it's much more. And now it's much more sort of a volume produced based on like real trace data.
Yeah. And so now, can you walk me more about your YC Winter 25 Takeoff story, the dog patch apartment, you and Shane and Avi?
So let me sort of set the stage. So there are 3 co-founders, myself, Shane, and Abi. You know, Abi and I were living in this, you know, 2-bedroom apartment in Dogpatch, right? Shane was living nearby with his partner and their 2 kids. One of the kids had just been born. He was about 6 weeks old, and so Shane's partner, she had some maternity leave from her job, so they're you know, they're there. We're here. You know, we get to YC. You know, beginning of January 2025, and we launched, you know, and sort of had a little bit of lift, which had kind of like gone down again as people found all the bugs in our thing and sort of started churning. But we were like, well, we think we've built the right thing. And we get to YC, and the first 3 days of YC are this like, you know, it's almost like you just spend them like getting to know all the other founders in the batch, right? You're building community. And we spend a lot of time getting to know the fellow founders in the batch. And we also spend a lot of time, hey, so you're building an agent for, you know, Swedish accountants. Can you show us your code? Can you show us how you're doing this? And like this kind of like, you know, multiply that by like 20. And you know, we would just like get people to like walk us through their code base and how they were doing things. And at the end of the 3 days, like, you know, we kind of came together to like regroup, and we're like, guys, we missed like 7 features that we need to have. And so we spent the next like 3 weeks like furiously building that stuff. And then after that, we kind of like then started going around the batch and we're like, hey, we're an open source TypeScript agent framework. Are you building agents? Do you want to use Mastra? We'll help you build your agents. We were doing these like whiteboarding sessions in our apartment where we would ask people to like, let's design it together. And we were still learning about this stuff, but like it was where we got to learn from the people we also that were coming in and sharing their thoughts, and we were also helping them like think through the problem, and we got a lot of knowledge. And then some of them we got to use Mastra, and you can sort of see if you look at like our npm download chart in early February, both from us being live on the internet on GitHub, right, on npm, as well as like within the YC batch, like our downloads starting to creep up. But then there was this one moment we launched a couple times internally within YC. And then like there was this one time, then we were like, okay, it's time to go launch on Hacker News. And so we spent about I spent about a day writing this like show HN post. Wow. And then like sent it over to Dan Gackley, who's the HN mod, and he sent it back with like this list of markups, and I'm like, no, this is totally right. Like I spent the next day like furiously like revising it, and then the day after that, this is Wednesday, I think February 15th, if I remember the date correctly. We post, we of 2025, right? We post our show HN on Hacker News, and all of a sudden, like it just keeps getting like upvotes and likes, and we ended up on the front page all day, and then like maybe like through the night, probably like 23 hours. We pointed it to our GitHub, right? And so people then went from Hacker News homepage to the GitHub repo and started starring our repo, and we got probably like 500 stars overnight, and we were like really excited. And then one of us noticed that we had gotten on GitHub trending because we'd gotten so many stars overnight, and so then we stayed on GitHub trending for the next week, and in that week we went from like 2,500 stars to about like 7,500 stars. And you can like sort of like watch our npm download growth accelerate. And it was one of those things where it was like before that we had like a small group of like users, and like after that there was just like we had so many people like flooding into our Discord, like using Mastra, like filing a bunch of issues, and it like there was a sense that like we were this like experimental thing beforehand, and then like we were this thing that was like still new but like growing very quickly.
Wow, that's incredible. And with all this growth, did you notice more like things you had to like maybe fix or improve? Did that really help you figure
Absolutely.
out? Yeah.
So like one of our biggest pieces of advice is that like you need to be able to build the machine that pumps user feedback back into your organization. Like everybody has to be a project engineer. Mm-hmm. So whether it was GitHub issues, whether it was Discord, whether it was like shared Slack channels that we started creating with our users, we just try to have as many touch points as possible. We'd actually brought on board some of the engineers that worked with us at Gatsby, and so it was like really easy, whether it was like one of us, writing a fix or building a feature, or it was one of the team. If someone mentioned something in a shared Slack channel, like, oh, that's good to know, and then like suddenly you build a small feature, you make a small bug fix, like whatever it is. I think that actually a lot of what traction is valuable, not for the up and to the right chart, but because users that use your product tell you how to make your product better. And yes, taste helps. Taste gets you started. Taste puts you in the right spot. But to make your product from good to great, you need that feedback. You cannot polish it. It cannot shine without like a constant stream of these like, of like 10,000 little like, hey, I was confused by this or that, that didn't feel right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so before Gatsby, you were an econ major in Michigan who came west in 2005 and ended up engineer. So how did you get from there to founding an open source framework?
So when I graduated from school, I worked at a couple of, we'll just call them like more corporate jobs that I didn't really enjoy that much. I'd done a lot of programming, but I wouldn't have just considered it more of like a side hobby or whatever. Then I ended up getting a job at a startup as an engineer, and I liked that much better. So I worked for a few different YC startups. and just, as a full stack product engineer, built in JavaScript some of the time, built in Python some of the time. Around like 2016, my best friend was working on this open source project, and Gatsby, and it started to take off. And my friend Kyle Matthews, he's as it was kind of taking off, he was trying to figure out what to do with it. And he was like, Sam, do you want to work on this together? I'm like, well, this looks pretty interesting, right? And we started working on it together, started building the community together, ended up going and raising some money together, and then starting the company. I think my journey is interesting because I didn't sort of start out in mind with like, this is exactly what I'm going to do. It was kind of a, being in the right place at the right time. And then like this, my friend kind of like, my best friend kind of being like, hey, do you want to do this? Right. Like, I think that like, it's okay that if you haven't known since you were like 10 or 12 what you wanted to do with your life, it's okay to get pulled, kind of like a little bit of luck, a little bit of circumstance into like what you kind of discover as your life's calling.
Yeah. And so Gatsby was able to grow to real revenue, and then what happened?
So I mean, it was a journey, right? So we started with a very popular framework. We weren't sure like how to monetize it. This was 2017. This was like open source monetization was very new, and we ended up, sort of like the framework kept growing. We ended up building a hosting platform. We ended up, getting a few hundred, maybe 1,000 customers. That journey took a few years, and by the time that journey was, a few years in, the market had shifted, and it was like pretty clear as we went out to fundraise that like we weren't going to be able to. We could have probably raised some more money, but like not on the terms we would have wanted to raise them on, not to the place where we felt like we could keep innovating and pushing the frontier forward. And so we decided that like that was the right time to sell the company. So we, the natural sort of like acquire was Netlify, because a large proportion of Netlify sites were actually Gatsby sites. Gatsby was the underlying framework. And so, we as a team, we joined Netlify. And something that I like to tell founders is that, when you sell your company, it's not your company anymore. And so, there are good parts, there are bad parts. But like, what ended up happening was basically like we had this Gatsby cloud product, the hosting product. We'd hoped to sort of port those parts to Netlify, and sort of like improve Netlify, and then sort of like shift our customer base over, and then sort of like what ended up happening was that like that sort of feature migration didn't happen. So when we shut down Gatsby Cloud, the customers didn't transfer, and then there were some rounds of layoffs at Netlify, and a lot of the engineers that were in sort of the core team ended up getting laid off, right? I mean, I think like, it was, and this is just something that happens during, we're still on we love Matt, the Netlify CEO, we're still on very good terms. The acquisition didn't go the way I think like, on either side it would have hoped to be. But, this is kind of like what happens as part of an acquisition. You are now a part in a different machine. You are no longer the person that architects the machine. And so, like that's just part of the trade-offs.
Yeah. Do you know if a lot of founders, when they get acquired, they just continue working, and then they end up starting something of their own again? Is there like a common pattern with that? It's like getting acquired and start.
Yeah. I mean, I think sort of like, a lot of people, there's kind of like a decision point that happens. Like you kind of learn after you've been a founder for a while. Like there's things that are great about, about sort of like being a IC or being a manager in a well-run startup, right? And there are things that are great about being a founder. And if you're a founder that sort of sold your company, you kind of have this moment where you're sort of deciding, do I want to go off and start a new thing? Do I have conviction on a new thing? Yeah. Or do I want to like find something that I think is great, that I think is going to impact the world in a positive way? And do I want to help them, with their scaling journey? For us, I think, because we kind of didn't have this great acquisition experience, we didn't really feel, we kind of all left Netlify at different places, and then it was almost kind of like a natural thing for us to start off and do something new.
Advice for people, like other companies getting acquired, like how do you make sure you don't feel this like pain or this maybe, you don't get.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, and every situation is individual. I think
Yeah.
there's like a few things. So the advice that I'll give that is, maybe a little bit silly, but like is also true, is that the more like, our acquisition basically returned the investors' capital, but we ourselves didn't make any money. We basically got like a signing bonus. If an acquisition is sort of a significant positive acquisition, that means the company has invested a lot of sort of their internal and real physical capital into this acquisition.
Yeah.
And so the more they invest into it, the more likely they are to like want to, keep it working, right?
Yeah.
If you sort of, also there's like an acqui-hire where like you kind of know that your thing is going to get shut down. And so if you come into that with that being your expectation, I mean, you're not going to be disappointed when your thing gets shut down. But I would say like it's a lot about like alignment of what you're trying to build and what you've been building and what the acquiring company has built, right? So if they really understand it and it's like very close to their domain, you have much better chances than if if it's just something completely different.
Yeah, and so then your team went off to build sales agents, and you said you'd forgotten you were great at open source dev tools.
Yeah, so this is something I tell to founders a lot. The Rumsfeld's quote about like there's like known unknowns, right? So he thinks that there's like 3 quadrants. He thinks there's like known knowns, so things that you know. He thinks that there's like unknown knowns, or known unknowns, so like things that you know you don't know, and he thinks there's unknown unknowns, so things you don't know that you don't know. Well, actually, like that's a 2x2 quadrant, right? But he's actually missing one, which is the unknown knowns. The unknown knowns are things that you know, but you have forgotten you know. And so a lot of my founder friends that have, founding is an up and down journey, and I've more than one founder friend I've reminded, like, hey, like you are really good at this thing. You were earlier in it than like anybody else. And yes, the market caught up to you and passed you by, but like you were earlier and you have this gift of like understanding and like building, and you I know you're really down that you sold your company and like, you got kind of like, but like, I want you to remember that, like, and so I think like, and the reason that like I'll sort of like tell my friends that, in their moments where I see them kind of like down, is because I remember this moment when we were down, right? Like, so let me kind of like set the stage, right? So Gatsby is kind of like fading as a framework, Next is kind of like clearly won, we got acquired by Netlify, and like, but now even like Vercel is like beating Netlify, right? And so like we start wondering, were we actually good at this thing? Maybe we were just like lucky. And so we're like, it really, I think especially for myself, for like Shane, for Abhi, like, losing sucks, and we feel that like really viscerally, right? And so for us, when we kind of, our first emotional reaction to that was to kind of like, well, let's do something else. Like, let's work on like sales technology. Let's work on these like this AI sales stuff. And we tried a couple different ideas. And whenever we were working on that, it just kind of like, we were like, well, we want to do this thing. Well, let's spend a week talking to people about how this should work. Then we would each spend a week and like, okay, like let's kind of like come back, and like we'd each have like different versions. So like we could try it this way or we could try that way. And we'd figure out what we thought was the right solution. It might be like a week or two later. And then, so we a lot of time went by, and it just felt like we hadn't built a lot, and we hadn't gotten a lot of like, users. And then, we decided we just kind of felt like this isn't the right thing. And so we tried a couple of other things. And all of a sudden in October of 2024, when we started working on Mastra, all of a sudden, like, and we had nothing. We'd spent like a few months working on this thing, and it was a relatively complete product or whatever. And we threw it all away, and we're starting with nothing. But all of a sudden, it felt like we were moving really fast, because whenever we should add this feature. Well, I think the API should look like this. Yep, I agree. And I think the functionality should be this. Yep, agreed. And then like, here's how we'd like describe it. And it's just like, and like, here are the nuances, here are the options that like this, here are the different options that we'd have for this key value pair and the object, right? And so we just like, we'd be so in brain sync on all the like little details of nuance that make that make a framework great, but that really make any product great, right? And so it just felt like we were running really fast, and so even though we were running out of money and we had nothing and we had thrown out this thing that we had spent like months on, and then we went to this conference and like people didn't really like it. We still had this like confidence that like we could figure this out because it just felt intuitive to us again. And we figured that like, look, if it doesn't work, we'll go out doing something that we feel like we're good at doing and we like love doing. And then we came to YC and then it all started, it was like almost the perfect story.
Oh, that's awesome. The thing you were sharing, I can see the passion in your voice, and it's incredible. And so what would you tell a founder who's in that kind of dispirited place right now? Yeah,
I mean, I've had founder friends that like, I've seen them, circling the strain on this old idea, and they'll come back, a year later working on something completely different, having gone through this journey where they were trying a bunch of different things, maybe consulting for friends or like, just like learning and exploring in a way that like paid their rent, right? And like, you can be so maniacally focus on one thing that you get blinders on and you maybe tune out the world, and that's good because you need to do it. But like sometimes if you're maniacally focused on the wrong thing, it's just you're gonna go nowhere, right? And so like usually the advice, whether it's kind of like it's just kind of like try to zoom out a little bit. You don't need to like and then there's founders that will zoom out and try to evaluate the entire idea space of everything they could build in. And I think that can be counterproductive too, because it's like, look, there's, but like try to zoom out to like a relatively, decent thing of like, hey, we think we'd be good at this. But I think it's usually like, if you kind of get dispirited, it's usually because you're narrowed so far in and up on a particular thing.
Okay. So insider versus outsider, you say founders should choose deliberately. Where did you choose to be and why?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like this, so open source is an area that is typically filled more with outsiders than insiders. And that's just because of the decentralized nature of it. If you're somebody that like made a popular project, you could live anywhere, right? And the open source community hasn't typically, if you look at open source companies, from HashiCorp to Elastic to GitLab to Mongo, a lot of times they draw their contributor base from all over the world. A lot of times their employees might live all over the world. Their customers are kind of all over the world. You can't sort of like, you can't kind of like target. And so inherently when we started building Mastra, we were a bit of outsiders. Like our team is distributed and remote because of the same team we had at Gatsby, which we had hired from everywhere around the world. And so I think that like, one thing is that like you start in kind of like a specific place, and we started much more with an outsider person. And I don't think it's bad to be an outsider. I don't think it's bad to be an insider. I don't have like value judgments around one or the other. But it kind of shapes the type of company that you build. If you're sort of are more of an outsider, you may build products for more of outsider. If you're more an insider, you might build products for more of insiders. And I think like you should just But I think the thing that sort of can be really hard is if you don't know who you are and you want to be something that you're not. And then you're just building something without your heart in the right place.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of remote work, you said it's very underrated in the age of AI. I mean, a lot of startups want people to be in person.
Yeah, and I think there's a few reasons for that. So here's the steel manning of the in-person. Of the in-person argument. So in person in San Francisco, the steel manning of that is change is happening so fast in AI. Change is kind of is sort of like distributed differently. So it's San Francisco is ahead of New York, which is ahead of London, and like certain pockets of San Francisco are ahead. And so the biggest argument for being in person in San Francisco, and then the other argument is that coordination is easier in person, and especially like if you are a first-time founder, it is a lot easier to like keep everybody on the same page if you were all sitting in a room than if you're like coordinating people in different places, right? And so that's the best argument for building in person in San Francisco. The best argument for sort of building remotely, or is that everybody or a lot of people, there's been a huge shift towards in-person. And that means that it is hard to build a team in San Francisco with great people. It is hard to keep a team in San Francisco with great people. And there are a lot of people that are, that you can hire people of a higher caliber if you're willing to expand your scope, accepting that there's some trade-offs in that. And it's always funny, when we do an offsite or when we get together, whether that's a whole company offsite, we all wish that we could spend more time together in person, right? And so we love working with each other, and we wish that we could, this is even as a remote company, we want to spend more time in person than we're physically able to do by the constraints of travel.
Yeah, no, I agree about the talent caliber. It's just you find a lot more people, especially people who don't necessarily have to be in person, like maybe designers or editors. It's just, it's easier like that. And also there's companies like Shopify, they're remote first, which is really cool. And then they do these team bursts every few months with the whole team. They come together. So it's very dedicated. Yeah.
And I think you have to be we happen to, the thing though is that you have to understand that it is a degree of difficulty higher. The way that someone put it to us once in 2017, and they were an engineering leader. They were someone that might be a director in an in-person organization might only be a manager in a remote organization. It is a higher degree of difficulty. So you have to be, it rewards sort of people that can kind of document their thoughts in writing, people that can sort of also keep in mind that remote does not mean async. You can be remote, but you can still make all your decisions on Zoom calls. That's totally okay. So don't assume that remote means async. Don't assume you have to hire people from everywhere in the world. It's much easier if you're remote, but in North America or North American time zones, or remote, but North America and Europe, right? Now remote and all, or remote and North America and APAC, right? It's really tough to have people in all three time zones because you can no longer have a stand-up where everybody is on the call at the same time, which means that, the in-person experience, the sort of, the bonding is lower. The other thing I'll say, and I've, as you can tell, I have a lot of strong opinions on this, is that we have this really weird advantage, which is that we went through this crucible moment together, 60-70% of the team at Gatsby together. So there was a real sense in which we were already in a bunker together, with our firearms, right? Shooting out at the enemy. And so we didn't as much need that experience with Mastra because we'd already had that together, right? So the team bonding is still important, but it's, because that's the thing that team loyalty and team bonding, if you don't have that, it's really challenging.
Yeah, no, it really is. And so what I think is really sweet is that you dedicated this book to your kids. Yeah. They're growing up talking to models and agents as much as to people. And so as a parent building this, what do you feel about the world they're walking into?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? My kids are 9 and 7. So, and, as the models get better, right, they have more conversations with their, hey, Echo, tell me about the 10 different types of harbor seals or whatever, right? They have more of these kinds of conversations. I think I don't think that that LLMs are fundamentally, in terms of the human computer interaction paradigm, I don't think that they're a fundamentally different type of thing than the things before. I think they're a natural extension of search, of mobile types of things. We got used to asking Google questions instead of yeah, I bet that that answer that that the biggest thing that ever happened was 1,000 people in the same place, whatever, right? We got used to asking Google questions instead of wildly speculating about stuff. We got used to, and we got used to using our phones in the same way. I think it's an extension, and the trade-off, the trade-off is always that the more time you spend interacting with computers, especially as a kid, the less time you maybe spend interacting with other people. Now, I think there's paradigms, a lot of people that do gaming where you're both interacting with people and with computers at the same time. I think that's the best option. But I think it's, I think there's great thing about this is they're learning to get all the information that they want whenever they want it.
Do your kids have phones or tablets or?
No, I mean they're too young for that.
Yeah, too young for that. Yeah, that's really amazing. Yeah, because I think a lot of parents they give their kids like technology very early on as well.
I tend to like so they do have small computers.
Oh,
The reason I give them computers and not phones is that computers have you can see this in like think about the level of gaming that you can do on a mobile device versus a computer, right? Like the interaction patterns are like much more limited on a mobile device versus like I can do this with keyboard and I can move a mouse around. Like you can play like a real game on a computer versus like what are you like versus what you're playing on a phone. The complexity is much more. And so I do like they will play like games on a computer, but I think that like now when you sort of like this is the interesting thing, right? Like if you're talking to a model, again, it's a much more conversational paradigm. It's much more social in a way. You're talking to the models the same way you talk to a person. So I think that like you get a lot of the pro social benefits without the sort of like anti-social costs.
And so we talk a lot about like the positives with like AI, but what about the negatives? Other than the common, people are going to be like AI is going to replace like jobs. What are some
I mean, I think this kind of comes back to like the question is like whether human-computer interactions is a substitute for human-human interactions. And if we get better at human-computer interactions, if we'll reduce our skill on human-human interactions, I think that's just the fundamental trade-off of computing. And so like. I think that's the biggest question is like how do I, for as a parent is how do I encourage my kids to continue to develop their social skills.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, the fact that you can like ask Claude for anything, for any help, but just like for example, if I like need some help with something, I still come to my dad with it, just because. Like, yes, I could easily maybe search it up.
Yeah.
But it's still like it's still really nice for him to maybe explain it or for him to like help me out with it, even though I could easily just talk with Claude.
Right, exactly. And I think like I mean, this is true both I think personally and like one of the things that we've noticed is that like like this time around people are a little bit more lonely working than they were last time because instead of like we don't pair program as much anymore, right? We used to pair program a lot when we were at Gatsby, but we don't like, because like you're gonna both watch the model, like we're each driving our own agents, but like we, that makes less social touch points for us as a team. I don't know what to do about this yet. I honestly don't, like hopefully we'll figure it out over the next few months, but it's more of a, like, I think this is a real challenge in both. Yeah, I think this is a real challenge we have to think about.
Yeah. And so you close the book with, we're all perpetual beginners. To build something enduring, you have to stay humble. In a field moving this fast, what keeps you humble?
I tend to think that, people are either humble or they aren't humble, right? Like there's like, some people are just sort of like, and then, but like once, I think the challenge is kind of like, the thing that probably keeps us humble most is our user feedback channels, right? Because like it just constantly reminds us that like, hey, when are you going to release this thing? Or like, hey, I ran into this bug, or I really love this like little improvement. It would be like, much nicer. And I think like that's the kind of constant stream of feedback that you need, where it's like, when other people start liking your product and then like there's like some people can kind of let that go to their head. I think there's also like a sense that like, so like for myself, like I'm spent like mid-30s. I've had a couple kids. I've been divorced. My co-founder Shane has a couple kids. He's been divorced. Like, no matter how well like Mastra goes, like it doesn't make it any easier to convince my daughter to like brush her teeth in the morning, right? Like it's just like so like there's like a lack of portability to some. I've also like gone through ups and downs in my life, and life isn't I end up just having a little bit of equanimity or whatever, or perspective or something. And then also just, I think the experience of having sort of like built something that was like pretty cool, very widely used, and then still sort of had a pretty unsatisfying ending, like makes you a little bit almost paranoid about like, hey, what's the next, cloud on the horizon? That I would say keeps you humble, keeps you like at the top of your game.
And what's the next cloud of horizon for you? Like, what are you looking forward to with Mastra?
I mean, it's both sort of like a cloud of excitement and a cloud of worry, which is that. So yesterday I was speaking at AI Engineer about, my talk was called "Every Harness Will Become a Claw," and it's about almost this, agentic spectrum from LLM to like now it can do actions. It's an agent. Now it's like durable and dogged. So it's a harness. It's like not just a local harness, but it's a cloud harness. It's always on. And then now it's not just a harness. It kind of becomes a claw. It's like responsive. It takes initiative. And like every point along that journey, right? Like as a domain complete framework, we keep building more and more primitives at different layers of abstraction. Our goal is to kind of keep helping the users to do that. If we'd stopped building and a year ago, like we would be dead now, right? Like so the thing that's exciting is that we can build better and more advanced and more long-running agents and applications that can do more work in our lives. And the challenge is that like we ourselves as we have to keep up with that. Otherwise, we're going to be toast.
Yeah. And final question. So what's the thing you believe about agents that you haven't found the right conversation to fully work out yet?
Thing I believe about agents that I haven't had the right conversation to work out yet. I think that it's going like if we look at like the 2010s, what happened was that there's a lot of different categories of mobile apps that kind of took off. Hey, you can like use maps, I can hail a ride, I can order food or whatever. I don't think it's like I think we really know what the categories of agents are yet. Like I have some ideas. I don't think we have a sense of like what types of agentic frameworks are better for things. We don't necessarily know. These parts of these kind of use cases are going to be, some like hosted agents, like managed agent services are going to win this. Open source are going to win that. Like I don't think we really know how the agent world is so big, right? And it's expanding so fast. I don't think anyone really has an idea of how it's going to shake out.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. This was incredible. Appreciate
I'm glad we could do this. So yeah, this is super fun.
And grab a copy of the book and stay tuned for the 3rd edition soon.
Yeah.